All of our confusion in the realm of psychology is due to the fact that we overestimate our own agency. We overestimate our own agency to a tremendous extent, to the extent that we actually use agency or perceived self-efficacy, which is a kind of related concept, as a measure of mental health. So there's this thing which we've overvalued completely, to the extent really that it isn't actually there in the way that we think it is. And we've used this as a measure of mental health, as a measure of how well we're doing in the old mental health department. So this is pretty crazy. Everything comes down to this question of what we can actually do volitionally and what we can't. So it's a bit like the division between voluntary and involuntary things that we can do with regard to physical activity. So I can wave my hands around, that's voluntary. I can do it if I want to, I don't have to do it. Other things like my heart beating is involuntary, it happens by itself. I can't really interfere with it unless I get to be some kind of yogi who can eat 1 grain of rice a day and slow my heart down. That's a different kettle of fish. I can't do that. So that we can see that there's things that we just can't do on purpose. I can't beat my heart on purpose. I can't filtrate my blood with my kidneys on purpose. I can't remove toxins from my blood by my liver on purpose. So biologically speaking, physiologically speaking, we can see that there's a vast array of involuntary processes and a tiny little bit of voluntary processes which we can do or not do. So if we translate that from the physiological to the psychological, we will be talking in terms of spontaneous versus directed behavior. And we have this big fat illusion, the big fat illusion that our directed modality of thinking and behaving is the boss, is the king, is supreme, that it actually counts for a lot, that it's a big thing. When it's not, that isn't the case at all. We're overvaluing the directed side of ourselves and completely ignoring the spontaneous side. And when we do that, we incur all sorts of mental health difficulties, because we can't get rid of the spontaneous side of ourselves and think we can do it all on purpose without paying a very heavy price. That really should be obvious. It is obvious once you see it, I suppose. And obviously it's not so obvious when you can't see it. There's a story about this old Saxon king, or maybe whatever he was, it might have been a Saxon, called King Canute. And the story is well known in England anyway, or in the UK, but maybe not so well known in other places, because he's like an old English king. And the story is that he got all his courtiers to carry his throne down to the sea and put it in the mid-littoral range between high tide and low tide, when the tide was coming in. So he's sitting there on his throne, he's facing the incoming tide, and as a king he tells the tide that it's not allowed to come in. He just says to the tide no. With all his kingly authority, he says no to the tide. This almost invariably is taken as understood as a type of story about how dumb King Canute is. What a plonker! What a complete idiot! Can we like it because he's all high and mighty, and he's getting above himself. He's getting the hubris, and he's thinking he can command the tides. But boy, is he in for a surprise, because before very long the sea's going to be up to there, and he's going to be festooned with seaweed, and crabs are going to be biting him, and prawns are going to be going into his ears, and it'll all be a big joke and serve him right for being such a plonker. So that's the popular understanding of that story, the story of King Canute. And that's the story that's how I was taught it anyway. But so I've read that the esoteric, i.e. hidden, not popular explanation of this is that King Canute was trying to teach his courtiers a lesson. And that lesson is that even though he might be at the top of the social hierarchy, the top of the social pyramid, right at the top, on his throne, just to emphasize, it don't mean a damn thing, because being a king doesn't make any difference really. It's just a nominal kind of a thing. Like if I was the king, it wouldn't make the slightest bit of difference. I'm just the same as I always am. It's not a real thing, and the king doesn't have any real powers. In law, the king, what would have done, I'm not talking about the present day, but the king would have had immense powers in law, in the legal framework. But that's not the real world. That's the artificial world. That's the societal world. So because that's a game we made up ourselves, we can give the king huge powers, and we do or did give the king huge powers. But we shouldn't confuse those powers, that authority, with the real world, with reality. So in the esoteric version of the tale, King Canute knows damn well he can't command the tides. But he's so sick of the obsequiousness of his court that he does this in order to demonstrate something. He's not going to talk about it, he's going to demonstrate it in a really great practical way. And then maybe he thinks that'll learn them, they might understand a bit. So the esoteric interpretation of the story of King Canute is very, very relevant from the point of view of psychology, because we have all these nominal powers. We think we're able to exercise volition over loads and loads of things, get things to happen what we want to happen, be the boss. But what we don't see is that that is only true within game reality, what Timothy Leary calls game reality, which is an artificial domain that we made up ourselves. And so we can have that power within the artificial domain of game reality being made up of all the things, the outcomes that we say are important. But when we're considering psychology, we have to look beyond the games that we play. And so really, this volition to make the right decision, we're so crazy about making the right choice, that the smart choice, making the decisions that will take our lives in a good direction, everything hangs on this. In reality, what we decide doesn't mean a damn. We're suffering from hubris. We're overvaluing the rational mind. All the important things, the whole psyche, in fact, is completely involuntary. It's completely spontaneous. We don't control it at all. So there's a list of all the really important things in life, things that really matter. So, for example, creativity, kindness, insight, intuition, love, all of these things, they're completely involuntary. I can't do any of them on purpose. I can't love on purpose. I can't be creative on purpose, etc., etc., etc. I can't heal on purpose. I can't forgive on purpose. I can't let go or give up stuff on purpose. And if there's one thing neurotic suffering shows us, it is that our intentions and our purposes don't count for anything. They don't matter a damn. it really don't matter a damn. In fact, the great lesson that we learn in neurotic suffering is that it's our purposes and intentions and our attempt to control that traps us. And if only we would give up all that stuff, then the our spontaneous nature would come to the fore and free us, because that's what it does. We can become free, not on purpose, because no one ever became free on purpose. That's overvaluing of agency. We can become free by giving up our attempts to control. That's what we can do, kind of. It's not really what we can do, because if I'm in the midst of obsessive controlling, neurotic controlling, and I try to stop controlling, I'm just trying to control my controlling, so I can't give it up. But there is a process whereby it can happen that I give up my controlling. When I learn a lesson, not with my thinking mind, not with a little microchip executive center, but when I learn it deep down in my bones, in the very core of myself, when I learn that this doesn't work. So this isn't intention. It's the result of becoming wise. It's when our spontaneous nature reasserts itself and we stop overvaluing the executive center that makes the decisions. So what happens is, when I go through this enough times, I learn on a very deep level that I can't control. I don't have the power to make things be what I want them to be. And so on a very deep level, I give up. And then the spontaneous side of our nature, and it's not a side, it's all of it, comes to the fore. And that's what frees me. To be spontaneous is to be free. To not have to calculate everything, deliberate everything, plan everything, and rationally compute everything, and then purposefully enact everything, is to be free. Thank God for that. We don't become free through rational deliberation or the enactment of purposes. That's just trapping us in our own thoughts. That's trapping us in our own mind. We can't free ourselves from our mind, from the thinking mind, with the thinking mind. But by learning that the thinking mind is only a very small thing, and learning that in a very deep way, we can become free from it in a spontaneous way. Because everything is spontaneous, everything is free in the psyche. It's only our little games that things depend upon, making the right choices, the life-affirming choices, etc., etc. That's true in games. So that's fine, but the psyche isn't a game. It's a given. It's not a tyrant that is above us, because it is us, but it's an unknowable us. And it's an us that we can't direct to be the way that we want it to be. And when I say direct it to be the way we want it to be, I mean direct it to be the way that the little microchip rational processor thinks it should be, on the basis of its very limited, impoverished models or theories about what's going on. So really what we're talking about is hubris, thinking we can do stuff that we want, and thinking that that is good, thinking that this is a great thing, and that because we're able to do all this stuff and be so intelligent and technological, we got it made. When actually the complete opposite is true. Because we have so much hubris, because we're so technologically advanced, etc., etc., and we put all our money on controlling, we've actually screwed ourselves up more thoroughly than any other population of human beings have done, as far as I know, in the last 2,000 years or so. We've got that extra hubris, and who's going to argue about that? We've got so much hubris now. Undoubtedly the most arrogant species on planet Earth. Which brings about mental suffering, neurotic suffering, because that's the way that we learn about our hubris. And while it's very easy to drift into this sense that we have that the ego has all these godlike powers, to come back out of that false sense of omnipotence is a long drawn out and excruciatingly painful process. And that's the way the psyche works. The psyche isn't in a hurry. We're in a hurry. The rational ego is in a hurry to get things to be the way it wants to be. But the psyche isn't in a hurry. It's not really threatened by anything the ego does. The ego is only making trouble for itself. The rational sense of me as this agent, this purposeful doer, which is a construct of thought, that's making trouble for itself. So all the important things, all the things that actually mean something, cannot be done. We have compassion-focused therapy. Cannot be done. It can't be done. It can't be formulated. Well, it can be formulated, but we can't follow the formulae to the desired outcome. It can't be done. It happens. We can't get clever and make it happen when we want it to happen. Meditation can't be done. Not thinking can't be done. Insight can't be done. Enlightenment, if you want to go that far, can't be done. Who's there to do it? Does the ego do it? There's no one there to do it. It isn't something that needs to be done. So we completely barking up the wrong tree in a big way. And this becomes super pertinent when we're talking about mental health. Because as I've just said, all of our mental health suffering comes from hubris, from the rational mind getting above itself. The rational mind is like the Sheriff of Nottingham. He's got a job to do. Sorry to genderize the rational mind, but for me, I tend to think of the rational mind as a male, masculine type figure. And I tend to think of the psyche as being more feminine, but that's just the way I think about it. But the rational mind is like the Sheriff of Nottingham. King Richard the Lionheart's gone away. He's gone for years and years and years, and he's been left behind in his stead to rule fairly and wisely and keep things going. He doesn't do that though, because he's a really power-hungry despot. So he pretends to be doing the king's will, but really he's taking all that power for himself to gratify his own need for power, to try and assuage his own insecurities. So that's the principle of the false steward, which we can find explained in lots of different ways in lots of different cultures. And so the principle of the false steward, the servant who becomes the master, is another way of talking about hubris. And the thinking mind is the servant. A very useful servant, but not to be let alone to do its own thing, because he'll take over the throne straight away. And then because he is ruling not fairly, not wisely, but tyrannically, pestilence will follow as surely as anything. The land will be blighted by pestilence and wrongdoing and unjust acts. And that's exactly what is happening in our current world, which is completely given over to thought. And there's no question about that. We worship thought. We don't give any time to anything else. And the pestilence has descended. We're living in the pestilence. So without getting too excited about that, because it's always possible to rant on and on about how bad things are, that doesn't really serve any purpose. But just to say that the answer is the eradication of our hubris. To realize that this thinking mind we've put so much stock in can only do a very, very little. And if we can get rid of this confusion creating state of affairs where we think it can solve everything. And you can have all these books on psychology and psychotherapy and all the rest of it written by the rational mind that can somehow solve things. It's utter fantasy. Nothing coming out of the rational mind is any good at all. And that tends to sound extremely baffling, because we think, well, what the hell else is there? But there is something else. The rational mind is only a small little thing. There is something else. It's just that we've never, ever, ever paid any heed to it, any attention to it.